Okay, recording in progress. So we're picking up here. We're in the chapter more about alcoholism, chapter 3, and we are on page 35, second full paragraph. It's right before we're going to get into Jim's story. I don't know, David, you want to set anything up, or you want to just jump right in here? Yeah, okay. So I guess I'll just sort of, we'll just circle back. Maybe I'll just reread the last paragraph before, because it kind of flows then into Jim's story. So the previous paragraph talked about what sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink. So what's going on in our minds when after we know bad stuff happens, we still pick up? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree, which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy, are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. So when all this bad stuff happens, the people around us love us and care about us, they're like, I don't understand why this guy, why this gal is going back into the bar again. Why does he? Of what is he thinking? So now we're going to get into this 4 different great stories, 3 sort of based on true people, right? And then 1 sort of fictionalized one. So the first one we're getting into here is Jim. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He's an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us.
I did have one definition. I didn't really know what lucrative meant, so I looked it up, and it's defined as profitable. So he inherited a profitable automobile agency, and I just felt like that was kind of a good one to get into because this is just talking about how well-to-do Jim is. He's an intelligent man, a good salesman. He has a profitable business. So, all good.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that other than the fact I identify with it. And that's what I'm supposed to be looking for when I look at these stories anyways. As we go a little bit farther into this and they explain the progression of his illness, which is alcoholism, we'll find out different things like nervous disposition is, a person's inherent qualities of mind and character. So a lot of those dispositions, if I'm a sunny, happy-go-lucky guy, I can rub off on other people. But if I'm a nervous disposition, not too many people are going to want to hang around me. But prior to that, earlier in the paragraph, they're talking about he was a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. I've been a salesman for 40 some years. I've always been a good salesman until I started drinking. Then all bets were off. Everybody likes him. If you're a good salesman, everybody likes him. That's a good way to measure whether or not you're a good salesman. He's an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for that nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. Could you imagine? In the roaring 20s, this guy didn't drink at all. It's like, oh my God. So he's 35 years old. How's that even remotely possible? In a few years, though, watch how progressive this is. So violent when intoxicated, he had to be committed. And on leaving his asylum, he came into contact with us. So we're talking about assuming Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, assuming.
Yeah, not much to add. I think David colored it in right. Jim, good guy, a lot going for him. Everybody liked him. And then at some point, right, at least noticeably, even though I'm sure there was a gradual shift, but at some point he lost all control once he started drinking. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family, for whom he had a deep affection.
I had the definition of consternation, which is defined as amazed terror. So to his amazed terror, he found himself half drunk a dozen times in rapid succession.
That's a great definition.
Yeah,
I love
amazed
that.
terror. I don't think I've heard that one before.
Love
ahead,
that.
David.
So we told him what we knew of alcoholism. So they're armed with the facts about themselves and about the disease of alcoholism, step one. And the answer we found, which are the whole 12 steps, but is the beginning with step two. And he made a beginning with step three. Just made a beginning. That's it. Made a decision. There's no action in that, just a decision. His family was reassembled. The external situations got a little bit better. Remember, this is an internal illness with an internal solution. Right now, he's not practicing any of that. He's just making a beginning. He began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. Uh-oh, be careful here. Looks like resentment under construction. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Hold on to that page. Go to the bottom of page 14. Let's connect the dots here in Bill's story. The very last sentence on page 14, and then we'll go over to page 15. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice, pardon me?
I'm saying, how does that happen?
Yeah. Oh, how? Through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, which is an action word, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die, and then faith would be dead. It would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. He failed to do the rest of the work in Alcoholics Anonymous. Did the steps 1, 2, 3, the little wall. So went right back out the door every time. And to his, what was that definition of consternation again?
Amazed terror. Is that right? To his amazed
terror, he found himself drunk. Dude, I remember thinking that. I remember thinking, how did this happen again? I promised her I was going to come home on Friday night. Now it's Monday. He found himself drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. That means that he kept drinking and he took a break because he couldn't drink anymore, and then he started drinking again. I did that many, many times. I relate to that. But here, on each of these occasions, we worked with him. That is so damn important for me to understand. Listen, I'm not going to waste my time. Don't get me wrong. But I am not going to give up on the newcomer. Why won't I give up on the newcomer, the guy who's a chronic relapser? Because I understand the first step. That's why. I know how I'm powerless over alcohol in my life is unmanageable. That's why I don't give up on the newcomer. He agreed he was a real alcoholic. Remember on page 30 that we had to learn to concede our innermost self that is a real alcoholic? He was armed with the facts about the disease of alcoholism and in serious condition. Can you be in mild condition and be a full-blown alcoholic? I don't think so. It's serious. People die from this every single day. People are never even introduced to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous. He was introduced to this. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. That is a true statement. But with no power, no choice, no control, on his own power, he's getting drunk again, just like me and you, on his own power. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had deep affection. Didn't we love our families? We absolutely, positively loved our families. But they're human beings, not a power greater than myself, not infinite power. I need infinite power to keep me sober. I need to have a relationship with power. That is what the beginning of the step 2 is, came to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity, to know the truth from the false. And as we get going on to page 36 here, I'm going to point out the lies, the delusions, the decisions, the actions, and the outcomes of what happens when we're drinking.
All right, and I see my internet's getting a little wonky here, so if I get choppy, I'm going to connect through my phone the next time.
Okay.
the next time you go on a long jag, okay?
Which will be
We'll
the
go-
next time.
Yeah, next time, right? Double, triple down. Okay, so yeah,
Yes,
so
sir.
I'm sure I'm just going to repeat a lot of what David said, but there's so much great stuff in this paragraph. It's worth doing a little double down on. So one thing that's very thank God for is the big book has got a lot of very clear instructions about how we're supposed to work this program recovery. Not only taking the steps, but then the real work that follows in helping the newcomer, right, qualify and then do the work themselves. So what did they do when they came into contact after leaving the asylum, after leaving treatment? Well, they told them what they knew of alcoholism. And what did they know of alcoholism? Well, they told them what
They told him what they knew. That's what they told him of alcoholism. He froze up. Go to your phone, bro. So what they knew about it. Are you there?
Oh,
Okay,
go.
go. No, dude. Go ahead. It's your thought.
Okay.
I've been working with you a long time, but not that long.
That's all right. So then he made a beginning, right? He probably became convinced he was a real alcoholic. He made his beginning. He started to do some of the work, made a decision. But then what did he do with the decision? What did he do with the commitment that he made to God, right? And to his fellows? Not much. Did he go on to make his inventory? We suppose not. It's not stated, but that's our assumption, right? He failed to enlarge his spiritual life because what? Things got good, right? Back in the house, back in the bed, like David talks about, or maybe he got this from Howard, right? Mama lets him cross the border in the bed. So everything's better. The kids are looking at dad again with some respect. And I'm just talking dad again.
Yeah, that
Better.
reference actually came from Babe.
Oh, from
Sorry.
Babe. Okay.
Yeah. Howard, I
So,
get a lot from Howard and Kathy both, but that one's from Babe. Go ahead.
I'll do credit to Babe then. And
Yeah, you need to switch over to your phone, bro.
Sam, you want to read the next paragraph? And I'll be back on.
Sam, is it okay if I say something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I should have brought up in the last paragraph. So I know I give this definition quite a bit, but just emphasizing that asylum means like a psychiatric facility, and we don't use the word asylum anymore. It's very frowned upon because it gives such a negative view of it. So, but again, this book was written in the 1930s. So, but yeah, that's what that means, and we don't use that word anymore.
Thank you, Ashton.
All right, on to the next paragraph.
Yes, please.
Page 36. Yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owed. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk.
Okay. Any definitions there?
No.
Okay, cool. All right. So remember the prior page on page 34. Moreover, bottom of the page, he faced another trip to the asylums to be kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had deep affection. Those are really good reasons to stop this behavior, correct? Next page, what Sam just read. Yet he got drunk again. Why? No power, no choice, no control. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. So if it's Bill and Bob, they asked him, they want to know what happened 2 minutes, 5 minutes prior. What were you feeling? What were you thinking right before you picked up that drink? This is his story. The writing changes here. Bill lets Jim write this story in first person. He's going to tell it in his own words. I remember I felt irritated, he says. that I had been a salesman for a concern I once owned, and I had a few words with the boss. If I had a few words with the boss, but I'm justifying that it was nothing serious. The reason why is probably because I'm angry because now I'm working for the place that I used to own that was handed down to me from my family. And now I'm angry because now I have a resentment against him. So I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to drive to the country, which sounded kind of ridiculous until I read up a little bit more about that. But it was probably a customary thing to kind of do. Go out to the country. You know, some people might have some money, go to a cafe and sell cars that way. So, you know, now that I've heard the whole story, I think it makes sense. So he felt hungry. Nothing wrong so far, correct? Nothing wrong. I stopped at a roadside place where they had a bar. Are you in fit spiritual condition? Well, he doesn't know anything about that yet. I had no intentions of drinking. I got that underlined. Do I identify with that? I had no intentions in drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. Still nothing wrong with that. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place. So he's thinking salesman the whole time, which is familiar. I've been going there for years, so he might know the whole clientele of the place. He knows the waitresses. He probably knows the chef, the cook, whoever, the hostess, everything. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. So he had a few 24 hours, sat down at a table, ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Only thing wrong with that is I ain't ordering a glass of milk. I'll probably order a tea or something, but whatever. He can have milk. Silly part is he had another glass of milk. But so he had two glasses of milk and 2 sandwiches. Nothing wrong so far, right? It seems like a freaking normal day. No cloud on the horizon. Go ahead.
All right. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Better? Yeah? Okay, perfect. Thank you. I put the phone over by the window too for maximum coverage, so we'll see how it goes. So thanks for covering there, Sam. Okay, so yeah, what's being illustrated here, again, I'll just sort of double down on a couple of key points that David is making here. So this is one example of what we're starting to see grow and build and snowball about someone who's, we're going to see the kind of thinking that's dominating an alcoholic, right? Repeats time after time, the desperate experiment of the first drink. And we're really leading up, we're setting the foundation for, we're going to see the desperate experiment going to happen in the next paragraph. It's all italicized, as you can see. But look at what we're building towards. Remember, he got out of the asylum. These days, he'd get out of treatment center. He got in contact with, some of the early members. They told him what they knew about alcoholism. Hey, this is an illness. This is a disease. We're powerless. We're spiritually ill. Our lives are unmanageable, but we can get better. We've got this system. And so he was like, yeah, okay, I like it. I will be on board. But then he didn't do much beyond that. And so what happens? Life started to get a little good, decided maybe he was making too big a deal of it. And all of a sudden, he's not doing it. So first of all, I don't know if you mentioned this, but one of the parts I listen to Joe and Charlie Big Book Comes Alive is they say, we read this story for years, or this book for years before we read the line, I came to work on Tuesday. Now listen, maybe the car dealership was closed on a Monday, but it's much more humorous to think this guy supposed to be at work on Monday, didn't make it in. And so he shows up on Tuesday and the boss has some words like, hey, where the hell were you yesterday? We work 5-6 days a week. Right. So he had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Guys, I'm a boss. I own a business. I'm covering for one of my managers this week, and I'm kind of hammering her team on some stuff that they're not doing well. And I bummed out one of my best employees. And she said something to me, and I talked to her late day, and she's like, hey, I was feeling kind of defeated. She gave me some feedback, and I listened. I said, you're right. I shouldn't have said that to you. You're a good employee. I value you. That's not having words with the boss. That's good, healthy workplace interaction. When he's minimizing and saying had some words with the boss, I suspect we know what that encounter was like. Because in our previous lives, I bet we all had some less than appropriate interactions with our bosses. Right? Nothing serious, he said. Drove to the country, and whether or not it was legit, we don't know. But this is what he did. Goes into the bar, not thinking about drinking. Like, what's being illustrated here? And David kept saying, nothing normal, everything's cool. As far as we know, he wasn't planning on drinking when he woke up that Tuesday morning. He wasn't planning on drinking when he talked and had the words with his boss. He wasn't planning on drinking when he drove into the country, and he wasn't even, still no thought of drinking when he gets his second sandwich. And that's, hey, No shame on that second sandwich. All right. I like 2 sandwiches as much as the next big guy does. He's not thinking about drinking. He's thinking about having a full belly. Everything cool so far. No crazy thinking yet. Here's when the crazy comes in, right?
Italic.
Suddenly. Yes, thank you. Italics, squiggly writing. Very important, very expensive to do when they printed this book. Suddenly, and we'll talk about this word suddenly. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put, and I don't know, Sam, if you have the word suddenly, or if you don't, why don't you grab that if you can? Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment, remember, this was set up by the experiment of the first drink on the last page. The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. Sam, you got anything?
Good. Okay. So again, here we are in italic writing. Very important paragraph by all means. So remember, everything seems like a really good day. No intentions in drinking whatsoever. Hasn't done a lick of work internally about this illness that he has, other than the fact that he admitted like this is really bad. I'm gonna lose my family, and I'm gonna get locked up in an asylum again. So he goes out to the country, has his eats, he's doing fine. Then the word suddenly. Suddenly. If I knew what suddenly looked like, I'd call my sponsor on the phone and go, dude, Judd, next Tuesday at 3 p.m., suddenly is going to appear in my life, and I really need you to pick up the phone and be there for me. I don't know what suddenly looks like. I don't know when it's going to come. It's suddenly. This is why I ask guys who relapse, what were you thinking? What were you feeling 2 minutes before you picked up the drink? And most of the time, the response is, wasn't thinking at all. That's what I identify with. I wasn't thinking at all. The thought crossed his mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. There's the lie. There's the delusion that he could put. The insanity creeps in, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute when I get done with this paragraph. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into my milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart. The insanity comes suddenly, and the sanity comes vaguely. The sanity came vaguely, showed up, vaguely sensed I was being any too smart, but I felt assured. This is still delusion. This is the action that he took as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. Well, of course, the guy overate, ate 2 sandwiches, 2 glasses of milk. Like, if I know I'm drinking, I ain't drinking and eating anything, right? The experiment went so well, this experiment. Because you know what? You guys ever do that? Go out and have a couple, or go buy a 16th if you're a cocaine addict like me, and you thought that'll be good enough for the night. It never was. And you're making the call, you're getting back in the car, and you're going back out again. It's a lie. It's delusional. He poured it in his milk, and that seemed to bother me, so I tried another. So look at the cartoon that Rob just posted on there on the chat. It's kind of cute, humorous. Cartoons are funny. But he felt assured I was taking whiskey on a full stomach. That is a lie. That is delusional. The decision, the action he took is he ordered the whiskey, poured it in his milk, and the experiment went so well he ordered another one. That is a decision and an action after the fact because he had already broke out in craving. That's what he did. And the outcome is in the next paragraph. That's all I got there. Thanks.
I do have the definition of
Plus,
suddenly.
go ahead, please.
Suddenly is defined as happening unexpectedly or met with unexpectedly.
So the insanity comes unexpectedly. But let's look at this entire situation here. this isn't Jim's entire course of thinking. David was just describing as delusional, right? It hasn't even graduated to denial. It's completely not in his right mind. It occurs to Jim, I just ate 2 sandwiches and 2 glasses of milk. I'm going to put some whiskey in milk because I believe it's not going to affect me. Well, what's the point of having the whiskey? What did we learn from Dr. Silkworth back in Roman numeral 28? Well, we learned that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. We want the effect produced. We want a sensation. We don't want to put alcohol in our bodies and not have it affect me. There is no purpose. If that was the case, we would be satiated with non-alcoholic beer. But when I'm still out there drinking and ripping and roaring, was I ever interested in drinking non-alcoholic beer? No. Why? Because it didn't produce an effect. So not only is Jim crazy to think that he wouldn't be affected by putting whiskey in milk, but he was so delusional, he thought he needed to ingest it for some reason other than the effect he wanted produced. Crazy talk. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. And because it's in italics, let me repeat those last couple sentences. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, knowledge. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk.
Sorry, one of my guys is calling me right now. He's in the hospital, so I'll call him back. Yeah, so I he's okay. He's getting surgery. So thus started one more journey to the asylum. Here he is, back into a mental hospital, committed the same way as I was in my last time I took a drink. He has a threat of commitment to loss his family position. How many times does that happen? Countless times. To say nothing of the intense mental physical sufferings which drinking always caused him. How about the DTs? How about the way you felt? I mean, miserable. I was down 145 pounds, soaking wet. I mean, my belt, I had no more holes in it. I looked terrible. And like David said, this is a peculiar mental twist in the italic writing at the bottom of the page. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. That is so delusional. That is such a lie that he believed the lie. The liar shows up inside of me, and it sounds just like me. So I buy into it, and I pick up the drink. I pick up the dope, and I shoot it. I smoke it. I snort it. I do whatever I need to do because of the next paragraph, who I think – we read at the bottom of page 14 and the 15, for if an alcoholic failed to perfect in the largest spiritual life, and on the 15, that is one of my favorite parts of the book. That reminds me all the time how I got to continue to work this. This is a program of action. But I also love the next paragraph on page 37, the first part of that first paragraph there. I love it. Those are two of my favorite pages in here. So we'll get to that in a second. Go ahead, David, jump in there, please.
Yeah, so the italicized portion. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. What good is that self-knowledge? Well, we saw it didn't do Jim any good. It didn't do Bill Wilson any good either. Remember, he hadn't done all of his treatments with Dr. Silkworth. Dr. Silkworth had educated Bill about his problem, and he thought self-knowledge is going to be good enough for him. Right? He had to get into service and have a spiritual awakening before he could get recovered, just like the rest of us. Yet all reasons for not drinking. So despite knowing the facts, despite having the experiences, despite knowing that every time he drinks, bad stuff happens, all his reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if he only mixed it with milk. Guys, this is an illustration of alcoholic insanity. And I took us back to Roman numeral 28 a moment ago, and I'm going to go back there again because these couple of paragraphs dovetail so beautifully with it. I pointed out the entire purpose for anybody, not just us real alcoholics, real addicts, anybody who drinks alcohol, is because men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Take the edge off, get some beer muscles, be a better dancer, go and talk to that cute guy or gal, whatever the reason is. I want an effect produced. The sensation is so elusive. I can't get the effect produced I want because I break out in craving. I take the edge off by having 2 drinks. But when my body breaks out and it's allergic reaction to alcohol and I break out in craving, I don't have 2 drinks. I way overshoot the mark. I have 22 and I don't get the effect produced. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. And this is exactly what's happening here to Jim. He has knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. The truth is, if he picks up again, he might know this, but it doesn't come to mind. If Jim picks up, then he's going to end up being committed. He's going to lose his job, his place in society. He's going to lose his family that he loves. The false, the lie, the insanity of that first drink again is that he can ingest alcohol and milk and it's not going to affect him. Cannot differentiate the true from the false. And sneak preview, because we're still in step 1 here. Sneak preview is step 2, which talks about coming to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. That's the sanity that's being talked about in the second step, not the crazy things we do, the crazy decisions we make, the crazy actions we take. It is the restoration to a sane understanding and thinking about alcohol and how it affects us. Moving on, top of page 37. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else?
It's funny because I am going to give the definition of insanity. So I actually have 3
Please.
different ones.
And maybe Ash has got one for us too. Go ahead.
Oh, true. So I have the Webster Dictionary, or 1938 Webster Dictionary definition of insanity, which is unsoundness of mind. And then the Big Book Dictionary definition is extreme senselessness or foolishness, delusion, delirium, irrationality. And then another one that I've heard, I don't know where it's from, it's very common, but it's also defined as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
So I do have one. So insanity is a mental illness of such a severe nature that a person cannot distinguish fantasy from reality, cannot conduct their affairs due to psychosis, or is subject to uncontrollable impulsive behavior.
So when it occurs to me in my not recovered state to pick up a drink, I cannot distinguish between fantasy and reality. What is the reality of me picking up the drink? What is the truth? That I'm going to drink too much, that I'm going to touch some woman in the bar inappropriately, that I'm going to get punched in the face by her boyfriend, that the bouncers are going to throw me out of the bar, opening the exit door with my skull. That's the reality. That's the truth. That is my life. What is the fantasy? The fantasy is that I'm in a tux and top hat and white gloves, swirling a cognac, sophisticated, and everybody laughing at my highbrow jokes. Guess how many times that fantasy happened for me? In a round number? 0. That's as round a number as it gets. 0 times. There is no capacity for the unrecovered real alcoholic to have a realistic, truthful interpretation of what's going to happen when we pick up. I only believe in the fantasy. I only believe in the false.
Like I said, I love this paragraph, and I'm just going to go right here. To use the word precise, specific, clear-cut directions in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he's using the word precise here. Definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. The absence of clear thinking here. How can such a lack of, I love this, lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? I need to consider that as a new person, as a process person who maybe has other addictions. I need to understand that I don't think straight. How could this lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? And remember, there's one other thing, though. I got to ask myself these questions. Do I desperately need Alcoholics Anonymous? Do I desperately need a vital, life-giving, life-saving, success and continual existence of something experience? And as we get to step 2 and we agnostic, do I desperately need God? Because if I can stop on my own power, then please go ahead and do that. But here's the problem. The insane thought always wins out. Always. It tells me I'm not going to have a drink, A, and then B, I could probably have 1 or 2 as long as I put whiskey in my milk. That's the experiment. And the delusion and the lie that we heard in Jim's story was he could drink whiskey on a full stomach if he only mixed it with milk. And then the decision and the action that he took was he ordered the whiskey, poured it in the milk, and the experiment was so well he ordered more. But then we read on the bottom of page 36, one more journey to the asylum for Jim and the mental and physical suffering that always caused him. That has always been my story in this chronic and progressive illness that I have. This cannot be cured by any human power.
Continuing on, second paragraph on 37. You may think this is an extreme case. To us, it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our own sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. One more time. But there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning that there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. Next day, we would ask ourselves, in all earnestness and sincerity, how it could have happened.
I have the definition again of phenomenon, which is described as a rare event. So in the sentence, but there was always the curious mental rare event that parallel with our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking that first drink.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, so you may think this is an extreme case. So remember, Bill Wilson wrote the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's a mystic, he's a poet, wonderful man, right? And I don't know for sure, maybe Howard will help us afterwards, but I think this is really not Jim, but it's Ralph Furlong. I could be wrong. Is that right, Rob? Okay. So anyways, and Hank Parkhurst helped him write it too. So is this all factual? Not a lot of documentation to say it is or it isn't, but the fact is like, so this may be an extreme case, but it may not be, because I can relate to it 100%. I've lost almost everything. Every time I got drunk, I thought it was I didn't think. I picked up the drink. The insane thought always won out. So it's not really an extreme case. And then it says, we have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences. Like, my family would reflect upon the consequences. Like, dude, you're going to lose your job. I mean, you just got 5 days off in a row without pay. We can't even pay our bills. If you drink and drug again and miss a day of work, you're gone. sure enough, that's going to happen in untreated alcoholism. Even if I stop drinking externally, I could still lose those things because of my irritable restlessness and discontentment. But there's always that curious mental phenomenon, this obsession in the mind, this phenomenon. My family was baffled. They could not understand my father-in-law, who I have a great relationship with now, but then he could not figure out why I kept doing this to myself and to everybody around me. That parallel with the sound reasoning, I had no sound reasoning whatsoever. The insane thought won out every time. And as it says, there's some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink, whatever you want to call it. My dad died. You know how many times, this is a long time ago, before the internet, I would say, oh, my Aunt Sally died and I couldn't make it into work today and I forgot to call. And like, oh, what town did she die in? I'm like, oh, somewhere in Kansas. It's like, so I don't want someone to look in the local newspaper. It's like, dude, I could lie to you like that. My lies are horrible as I look back at them now. But any trivial excuse because I was unable to make it into work. But the insane excuse for taking what? The first drink. The obsession comes before. The allergy doesn't happen until I take the drink. The obsession comes before I take the drink. And then that insane thought won out. It always wins out. Do I desperately need a power greater than myself? Do I desperately need to have a vital spiritual experience? Then the next day is see if this resonates with you or not. This resonates with me. This is the question I always ask myself. Would you ask yourself this in all earnest and sincerity? How could this happen again? How? How did I promised myself. Bill wrote the solemn vows in the Bible, dated them umpteen times. I did the same thing. I stole my wife's hope over and over and over again. That was the worst thing that I ever did. Ask myself those questions. How could this happen again? Well, I can tell you how again. On my own power, I would drink and drug again.
So David ended on, one of the techniques we like to do a lot when we're reading and studying and helping a newcomer, taking these statements, turn them into questions. So we ask ourselves, as a newcomer, does Jim's story sound like an extreme case, relative to your own experience? As you had thinking that's been characteristic of this kind of, approach that Jim had? Did you ever reflect more about it? I relate to that. I consider, because I made all these declarations, all these promises, all these lines in the sand, all these limits. Well, I'm never going to drink a drug over a woman. Well, I'm never going to drink a drug on the job. I'm never going to spend money on drugs that I don't have in the bank account. All of these lines in the sand, and each one successfully smashed away. Right? I've got to relate to Jim, and I'm trying to remember who. I've been listening to somebody recently a lot. Oh, I think it's Billy N, who talks about parallels with some of these stories and the whole concept. Well, I'm a friend of Bill, and he talks about, am I a friend of Jim or Fred? Do I identify with these stories in this chapter, right? Of these guys who had all of these crazy thoughts and had everything going for them, and then threw it all away in an instant, suddenly, right? Ask myself that. Did I drink over some insanely trivial excuse? Listen, did I drink over serious things like the death of a friend or a loved one or losing a job? Those are all serious things. Certainly I did. But did I also drink over trivial things? Did I drink over the girl that I dated for 2 weeks who broke up with me? I barely knew her last name, right? Those kinds of ridiculous things. Did I drink over how I didn't like how someone talked to me at work? It was a totally meaningless encounter, right? Trivial excuses. Did my sound reasoning fail to hold me in check? Was self-knowledge ever enough for me to say, I better not drink a drug tonight? Right? In my experience, did the insane idea win out? Did it always win out? I don't know. Can I say always? 100% of the time? Probably not. High percentile? Did the insanity win out? You bet your butt it did. And David asked this too. How many times did I wake up the next day completely earnest, completely honest, completely sincere, asking myself, how on earth did this happen? Where was my great resolve? Where was my solemn oath? Where was my promise to myself and my family and the girlfriend and the boss and everybody else, right? To whom I pledged I wouldn't do it again. In some circumstances, we've gone out deliberately to get drunk. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll talk about this. Feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we're obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in light of what always happened. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be.
I have the definition of premeditation, which is described as planning beforehand as of a criminal act. So during the period of planning beforehand of what the terrific consequences might be.
Let me hop in here first, David, because there's a little bit of language in here. We got some $20 words and some sort of old-fashioned thoughts. So what this paragraph is really saying, to break it down into simple language, it says, sometimes we went out to get drunk on purpose, right? Because previous to this, as it relates to Jim's story, we're talking about suddenly and unexpected. You know, the drink happened to him, and it's asking us to relate. Did I have situations where I found myself drinking even though I didn't expect to, didn't plan to? But this is saying sometimes I went out on purpose to get drunk. Why? Because something happened. I felt I deserved to go out and get shit-faced, you know, because I was nervous, angry, I had something to worry about, I was depressed, I was jealous, or any of the other maybe positive emotions. I got the promotion, I got the new girlfriend, things were going my way, which, you know, we're going to see in Fred's story. But it says, even in this type of beginning, so even when I went out on purpose, I have to admit to myself that whatever the reason I had for starting to drink was insanely insufficient. It means I was nuts for justifying going out to get drunk, because I know what happens when I do that. So when I say, you know, I had a tough week, I had a great week, it's okay, I earned the right to drink, my sane thinking would say, David, no, don't do that. Go celebrate, go watch a movie and have a pizza. That's healthy. But instead, I do the unhealthy because I'm in the fantasy world. I cannot differentiate the true from the false. In the light of what always happened, what always happens, I overdo it. So it goes on to say, I can see now when I look at my drinking history that when I began to drink deliberately instead of casually, so deliberately means like purpose instead of casually, commonly, normally, you know, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what it might be. So what that fancy language is that I simply didn't consider the outcome most of the time once I began, irrespective of why I began, whether it was on purpose or whether I found myself drinking, it didn't matter. I had no consideration of what was going to happen downstream.
So, yeah, I'm not going to add too much more than that, other than the fact is I got to be really careful with this justification stuff. And the question is what David just read about this nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or like, how many of us drank behind one or all those things? All of them for me. I drank behind every one of them. I used behind every single one of those things. And then at the bottom of the page, it talks about here, we now see that when we began to drink deliberately, so when I set out to get drunk, remember what David read in the bottom of page 28, Roman numerals, the men and women drink because they like the effect produced. Let's just scratch the men and women out and just say alcoholics drink because they like the effect produced. Period, the end. I got to say that. It's true for me. Drug addicts, I use because I like the effect produced. And instead of casually, there's little serious or effective thought during the period of before I take the drink. When I was a thief, I premeditated my crimes that I was going to rob you and do the things that I was going to do. I'm not going to tell you what those things are right here. I have made my amends for those things in the past. But I never thought about the terrible consequences because I never thought I'd get caught. And when I intended not to drink too much, I never intended to drink too much. But that's a lie because I gonna break out in craving every single time. I need to know the true from the false. The last thing I want to say is Howard and Kathy posted in the chat something that I use. I use all their stuff because I go to their Sunday 4 o'clock big book study that they do a great job with, and I wouldn't miss it for the world. There's a little page on here that I've been using today, using through the 4 stories in this chapter. And I love it because it talks about the lie, the delusion, the insanity, the decision, the action, and then the outcome of this. And in the bottom of that page, it talks about, this is skipping ahead to page 43, and it's so important that I understand what this is. There it says, page 43, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any human being can provide such a defense. His defense must, capital letters all together, come from a higher power. Can't wait to get that far, man. I love this book. Thank you, Howard and Kathy.
I'm going to stop us here just a few minutes. Yes, thank you. I'm going to stop us here a few minutes early because I don't want to get into the next story. So
Okay,
one
cool.
sec here.